So it's got some powerful stuff there. And you can tell bad news in a story. MSc stories are not all positive. Sometimes they're about things that have gone wrong, but again, it's easier to tell why something didn't work when you can surround it with the contextual information that explains why it didn't work. However, the reason why stories aren't used more for monitoring and evaluation is because they're not known to be accurate or truthful. So accuracy in the sense that stories are often word of mouth, anecdotal, they can change over time. Truthful, same sort of thing. And so people often shy away from using stories, and it needs to be addressed. The validity of using stories in evaluation needs to be considered. Now, in MSc there's a very particular way in which that validity is dealt with. And it's more about the fact that MSc isn't actually about the stories. For example, you could, and I'm not advocating you do this, but we could make up some stories completely. What I could say to you, what would be the ideal? I could ask all the people on this table, I want you to think about an ideal outcome. Imagine a person, give them a name, describe what's happened, how they use the technology, what happened and what they did. Write it down in full. Now, read them all out and choose the one that's the absolute closest to what you want to achieve and say why. You'd still have that same sort of conversation. You'd still have the same sort of argument. And you could write down the reasons for your choice. It's the dialogue that MSc is really about. If you separate the reason why a story was selected from the stories themselves, you're not doing valid MSc. And there are a whole load of theoretical reasons why that's the case, but it's to do with rigour and qualitative inquiry. But just take it from me. You can't separate, you have the story, da-da-da-da-da, my name is Jane and I worked in a village and I tried this new technology out and this is what happened, the story. And at the end of it, we selected this story because it really shows what can happen when you use technology appropriately, how many unexpected benefits can come out of it. This is exactly what we were trying to do in this project. And it's that little narrative at the end, which is the really valid bit, and you can't separate the two from each other. So that's something to understand in a nutshell about why MSc is valid. Now, I thought the best way of getting your head around MSc is always to have a go, okay? So I'm going to give you a real taste of it, a really very, very short taste of it, because we are short in time. I'm going to give you a case study from a small project. I'll just give you a bit of background, and then I'm going to ask you to select one of two stories, like you do in MSc. And these are real stories that were collected in the field, and this is a real project. So a little bit of background for you. The project for the case study is a project called Ossitanata. It's a local name. It's a Bougainvillean NGO based in Bougainville. Bougainville is a semi-autonomous country, but was once part of Papua New Guinea. And we worked with them there. It's very small, 8 staff, a little project, a little organisation with 99 income generation projects. And it was once set up by Oxfam New Zealand. And the aims of this particular organisation, the work they do, is reconciliation and reconstruction. So I don't know if you know the history, you may not know anything about Bougainville, but there was this massive civil war, 10% of the population was killed, and everything was destroyed. All the electricity, no electricity at all. Roads were smashed, hospitals burnt down, houses burnt down, and the jungle just sort of crept over the top. And it went on for 10 years, and people hid in the jungle basically, and there was no schooling. It was like anarchy, complete. Nothing in society happened for 10 years, and it's just sort of the peace was brokered, and then this project went in, and it was as much about reconciliation. Because there were two factions that had formed, it was about getting people to work together and reconstruction. And they started to use MSc to capture those changes in 2004, to find out how the project had made a difference. Now, they already had a monitoring program in place. They used to record how many people went to events, how many projects there were, how much money had been generated, and other quantitative methods. And when I went there, they said to me, "We've failed. We've completely failed." And I said, "What do you mean you failed?" And they said, "Well, we're an income generation project, and only 5 of our projects have generated any income sustainably." And I was sort of saying, "But there aren't any shops. There isn't any market here." I mean, what is the chances of an income generation? Is that really what you're trying to do? And I said, well, as our performance indicator was the amount of money that was generated by these income generation projects. I said, well, let's try MSc and see what we find. And when they did MSc, they got a completely different idea of their impact. So that's a little bit of background for you. Is that enough background for you to do this exercise? Yep. Okay, so this is the exercise. On tables, I'm going to ask you to try to select what you think is the most significant change, story out of 2, and why. Remember, that's what you always do, you have to say why. So imagine that you are the members of, say, a board. It's often the board members or steering committee or people who would do sort of MSc of this NGO. You might be a staff member, government rep, project staff, a committee member, okay? And the question is, from your point of view, from whoever you are, point of view, which story represents the most significant change, okay? For example, if you want to say, well, what are you going to use the story for? I'd say, well, we're going to use this story to inspire people in the community about what's been achieved, and we're going to showcase it as the best of what's been achieved. So that gives you an idea of how it will be used. So how to select it? You need to read both of the stories. There's 2. I like them to be read out loud because they were spoken. They're oral stories, but that's up to you. And have a discussion about what you think they're about. And then you have to try and agree which is the best one and write down why. Okay, so of course there is no right and wrong choice here. It doesn't matter which one you chose. Okay, let me make that clear. There is no right and wrong ever. It's about what you value, and probably the mix of tables will mean that you'll value different things. So let's just first of all do a whip around and see which one you went for. Who went for the first one we are developing now? Put your hands up. Oh, your table, just one person per table. Yeah. Okay. How about if you chose the next one, building peace? Any tables choose building peace, the second one?
An individual.
Yeah, at the back there, good, thank you. You didn't agree. You didn't agree. And that's probably the first question you're going to say to me is, do you have to agree? And like what we do is, you don't normally have 2 for a start. You normally have maybe 10 stories and you have to choose 1. And you start off, I always start off by saying, choose 1, as if there's no choice. And then they go, but we've got different views. And I say, well, it's not actually about a consensus. It's about trying to acquiesce on something. So it could be that you choose 2 because they balance things off. Or you choose 1, but you say the majority of people felt this way. However, some people in the group still felt that this one hadn't addressed that. So the idea is to create a statement that everybody agrees on rather than actually choose one story. Nobody should be silenced in this process, okay? The idea is you capture the view of the whole table. And that's something to learn about how you do MSc, how you select, how you document the choices. But the whole idea is really about the conversation that goes with it. Now, people have often said to me over the years, we hate selection. We don't want to do selection. We don't want to be forced. All the stories are good. We need to keep hold of all of them. Why do you silence people like this? Like, well, what, you know, in evaluation, the job of qualitative inquiry is to reduce a massive amount of data down to a smaller amount that we can handle. Most things do it by averaging. MSc does it by selecting. It's a different process. All methodologies silence and choose things to mention above others. But this selection is actually the very heart of what MSc is about. And if you don't do selection, you're not doing MSc. You might be doing something really good, and that's fabulous. But if you want to do MSc, you have to do this step. Why? Because it's the actual process of making people feel a little bit uncomfortable that actually gets them to talk to each other at another level. I've tried it. I've tried giving the groups of people the stories without selecting, and they go, yeah, lovely story, what time's lunch, lovely story, how are my children going on, lovely story, when do we finish here? And then you say, now choose one, they go, ooh. And they have to read them properly and really think about what they're saying because they've got a task to do. And then they have to talk to each other about it. So in a sense, that the idea of selecting a story is a trick, a technique to get people to talk more deeply. And it doesn't matter which ones are chosen. It doesn't matter. The idea is to talk about what it is you're trying to achieve and why with groups of people. But saying that it's not about the choice. At the end of the day, the stories that are selected represent what that group of people thinks important, and therefore it's the perfect material to include to demonstrate what you've achieved and why.